Hello everyone and welcome back. Welcome to the Bootstrap section of the course. Bootstrap is a very common framework used for front-end web development, and it's actually going to help us save a lot of time from dealing with CSS manually. But first we need to ask ourselves, what is a framework? What makes it different than just a library or some sort of package? Well, a framework has a couple of key qualities. Some of those qualities are inversion of control, meaning you're giving up control to the framework. And the framework is going to have some sort of default behavior, and it's a non-modifiable framework code. And basically what this means is the framework is going to be defining the rules for you to follow, not the other way around. Usually we've been seeing ourselves write some code, defining the rules, and then executing the code. Here, the framework is going to tell you what the rules are as far as how you can manipulate the code. So there's an inversion of control there between what we're used to. And we'll get more used to this idea of what a framework is when we reach Django, because Django itself is a web framework for Python. Now, a large part of Bootstrap is not memorization, but really understanding how to reference the documentation for your own use cases. And this section will focus on some of the more common use cases of Bootstrap, but the main thing to get across here is your ability to reference the documentation, understand what you need to get out of it, and then apply it to your own website. Before we begin though, let's talk about Bootstrap version 3 versus version 4. So Bootstrap 4 is currently still in development at the time of this filming and will be released soon. Right now it's an alpha, so likely beta will come out after that, and then after that we'll get some sort of first initial release. Now it may already be released by the time you're viewing this video, but if it hasn't yet, Bootstrap actually makes it really easy for you to use the alpha version or the beta version if that's out by the time you're watching this right now. So you can actually quickly and easily use whatever the current version of Bootstrap 4 is, while Bootstrap 3 is still the main release. For our level of use, the differences between version 3 and version 4 won't really be apparent to us. We're not going to dive so deep into Bootstrap that these differences are even going to be on our radar. While version 4 is a major rewrite from version 3, we are really not going to dive deep enough to notice any of the differences. A few of the differences are things such as panels are now being replaced by something called cards, larger default font sizes, there's a new grid tier, the use of Flexbox throughout the version 4 framework, and a move from less to Sass. Now, a lot of these terms, if you're new to Bootstrap and new to CSS, probably don't mean anything to you, and you have no idea what I'm referencing here. If that's the case, really don't worry about it. We're not going to dive into Bootstrap so deep in this course, nor will we need to understand all these differences between version 3 and version 4. So again, the most important thing to get out of this section of the course is the ability to reference the Bootstrap documentation. So let's explore the documentation and see some examples of what Bootstrap actually looks like. The documentation is amazing. It's full of examples that makes it really easy to copy and paste and modify in your own code. Let's go to getbootstrap.com. Okay, so here we are at getbootstrap.com. You'll see a little banner here that says, "Oh yeah, Bootstrap 4 is coming." You can click on that if you want more information on version 4. But you'll notice that there's actually links on quickly getting started with version 4. Right now, it's in alpha, so who knows, by the time you're viewing this video, it may already be in beta, or it may already be on its first release. But let's go back and work with the current release, which is right now version 3. And again, for our use cases, either one will work fine for you. So if you click on Download Bootstrap, it takes you to this Getting Started link. And there's essentially two ways to use Bootstrap as far as in conjunction with your web application. You can either download the source code itself, which is going to be the font files, the source list, some JavaScript, etc. Or you can actually just use what's known as a CDN. A CDN is a content delivery network, and you can think of it as essentially working in a really similar manner to how we use Google Fonts. So Google Fonts API or the fontlibrary.org essentially allowed us to copy and paste a CDN link into our HTML file, and then it just got the files over the internet. And that's basically what we can do here. We can see the links here that allow us to copy and paste into our HTML file to actually link to Bootstrap code, which is great. You can see here there's the style sheet as well as some compiled and minified JavaScript. And we'll be talking about this when we actually open up the editor and start dealing with Bootstrap. But Essentially, we're just going to be copying these links. You can also manually download the links and then save them onto your computer and link to the local reference on your computer, but that just is a bunch of downloaded files that we don't really need. If you're trying to make your application self-hosted without any internet, maybe you're going on a train ride or something, you want to play around with Bootstrap, then you will have to download it manually that way. But if you have access to the internet, then you can just use CDN. And if you're watching this video, then it's most likely that you do have access to the internet. Okay, so coming back up here, I want to explore the documentation a little more with you. If you click on Getting Started, it'll take you to this link, and you'll notice that beyond the download, there's just basic information like what's included, which is right here what precompiled Bootstrap looks like. It's really just a bunch of CSS files, a bunch of font files, and then 2 JavaScript files here. There's the Bootstrap source code, and then if you keep going down, there's just basic information, basic template information, etc. And then there's some examples. So here are some examples of what the framework looks like. We can click on these to open up in new tabs, but hopefully you can begin to see an idea of what Bootstrap actually does. So here are some very simple templates of what Bootstrap looks like. So you can see there's a nav bar here, there's some sort of theme example, and then there are some buttons here. There's also the grid template, which we'll be talking about later on. There's a Jumbotron template. There's a narrow template, again with a Jumbotron here, and then there's a navbar template. And we're going to be walking through a lot of these things throughout this section of the course. Jumbotrons, navbars, grids, those are all really common things that we are going to cover with Bootstrap. But for more specific things, if you scroll back up here and click on Components, this will take you through basically all the components that Bootstrap has to offer. So if you want more details on, for instance, a navbar, you just click here on the side to navbar, and it has really great documentation. It'll tell you what the default navbar looks like, and then it has tons of example code. So this is an example of what this navbar looks like. So you can see it has a drop-down menu, and we'll be discussing what this looks like later on. And then it also has the code for it. So you can always reference the code as well as what the code is going to look like. So if you want a brand image in your navbar, it shows you an example of what that looks like and shows you an example of what that code looks like. If you want forms, input forms in your navbar, maybe a search button, it shows you what that looks like as well. So you can keep going down here. Maybe you want to check out how progress bars work with Bootstrap. Well, you just click on Bootstrap here on progress bars, and then you can see the basic example of what a progress bar looks like, and it shows you the code for it as well. Then if you want it with a label, it also shows you that. So you can see that Bootstrap is basically just a bunch of predefined CSS styles that are really going to help you, and they each have their own class. And we're going to discuss how to actually use these in a lot more detail in future lectures. What I want you to just get out of this lecture is the fact that you can reference basically anything you want about Bootstrap and see example code for it as well as what it looks like, all on the documentation page. Okay. So the very first thing we're going to be discussing when we talk about Bootstrap is how to use these buttons, these really simple buttons. And you'll see that they actually already have classes defined to them. So very basic examples look like this, left, middle, right, but they'll also have their own colored classes, which we're going to be exploring later on. All right, so go ahead. I encourage you to just jump around the documentation and check it out. But coming up next, we're going to talk a lot more about Bootstrap and buttons. Thanks, everyone, and I'll see you at the next lecture.